Think of what I was going to say here today that would still allow me to be friends with Barry, maintain my membership in the Atlantic Council, and tell you something that I think is the truth. So let me relate to you a little family history and a little context. Now, I'm spy, that's what I was trained to do, but I also come from a long line of people who had, well, let's put it this way, slightly questionable reputations. They ran.
You do too.
They do, thank you very much. They ran booze during Prohibition. My grandfather was someone who was from Boston and was originally part of something called the Ponzi scheme. And he made a lot of money at it, and he got out early. My father, and I was born in 1956, my dad was born in 1906. In the first 25 years of my father's life, he lived through 3 depressions. 3 depressions. You think the last one was bad, 1907, after World War I, and again in 1929, where you had more than double-digit unemployment. Banks failed. People did not necessarily trust a government, which frankly wasn't all that involved with them. So growing up with my father and listening to him talk about banks and the Depression, and by the way, he was a lobbyist here in Washington, so his opinion of this town, as you can probably imagine, was not high to begin with. It didn't rise. It was an interesting experience. Now, I grew up in a different time, and we grew up in a different time for the most part. My memories are of post-World War II. In 1944, July, I believe, somewhere up in beautiful New Hampshire, a place called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the Mount Washington Hotel, people from the United Kingdom, the US, and a few other countries gathered together to figure out how in the world we were going to survive after World War II, because we'd just gone through 10 years of depression, 10 years of tariff raising, et cetera, in the 1930s, which pretty much stifled the world economy. Now, 2 things happened at that conference, one of which, a guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes, was about ready to die. He was representing the British and trying to hang on to whatever shred of dignity the British had in the marketplace. They were bankrupt. By the way, the British went bankrupt almost twice beforehand. Just after World War I, by the way, they just paid off those loans about a couple of years ago to us. They almost went bankrupt in the 1930s, and by 1944, they were broke again, and they were living essentially on our monies. The largest empire in the world was essentially living on the US dollar, borrowing on the US dollar. So that conference in 1944 was essentially about how the United States and others were going to rule after World War II. So some of these delightful buildings that you see around town, World Bank, IMF, all